Welcome to the Dividend Talk Podcast, episode 44, a conversation about dividend growth investing with Ian Lopuch, part 2. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Dividend Talk. I'm your co-host, Engineer My Freedom, and today I'm joined with European DGI. This is a podcast where we discuss our passion for dividend growth investing with our own unique European flavour. If you're new to the channel, please hit the like button and subscribe to us, and check out our previous episodes on YouTube and Spotify. See you on the inside. So welcome back to part 2 of our 2-part series with Ian, and we'll just take it away.
Okay, I think we will do one more question, and then we will go to the listener questions, okay? Maybe EMF, would you like to take the last question?
So, sure. I think a good question for our listeners would be, what would you think retail investors should understand better, maybe that they're not aware of?
Oh, wow. This is a great question. I would say in the United States right now, there's a lot of disruption happening in the investing space and in the cryptocurrency space. And so you see like a lot of younger people in particular are gravitating towards like Robinhood. Robinhood is an app that a lot of people use, and they're using it to buy like meme stocks. They're in fact like investing in like companies that aren't even necessarily financially sound, but there's a certain movement around them. GameStop was a really popular one because, well, basically the hedge funds had shorted a lot of shares on GameStop. And so there was an analyst who came out that said, well, if we buy up all of the shares, the shorts won't be able to cover their position. There won't be enough float. And so it's actually a really brilliant analysis. But what I'm saying is a lot of younger investors who are kind of coming into the space through Robinhood, that's a lot different than when I started coming into the space through investing without a silver spoon by the Motley Fool and doing a $25 drip program on Compaq computer. It's just a whole different world now. And I like these disruptive apps. I use some of them. I do have an allocation to cryptocurrency, and I use some of these apps, like Voyager is an example that I really like. It's really cool. It's coming to Europe soon. But it's a very small sliver of the portfolio, very speculative, and I understand that I could lose my money there. And so I would say, for retail investors these days, I think one of the most important things to understand is that Robinhood investing, meme stock investing, cryptocurrency investing, that's not the only way. Tech stock investing, SPAC investing, there's so much fanfare around these investing vehicles. And I think a lot of the vehicles have brought new investors to the table. I was actually at my bank the other day, and I was waiting in line, and there was a man at the bank trying to open up an account for trading stocks. And he's like, I'm going to buy stock for the first time. And it was about the same day when GameStop was going through the roof. And I don't know what he bought, but I just kind of had a sense, oh my gosh, he's going to buy GameStop. And so I just would say that the way things have gone with social media, the way things have gone with just investing overall right now, I love that there's so many new investors because of it. But I think that a lot of investors may be taking on more risk than they understand, and that they're like me. When I first started out and I did the penny stocks, I did the trading, I learned the hard way all those years, and I just really hope for retail investors that they somehow stumble across this podcast, my YouTube channel, one of the other great YouTube channels in the space, and start learning that there is this avenue of dividend stock investing. Because in the world of dividend stocks, yes, it's not as exciting as doubling your money maybe overnight, but it is very possible with some hard work and some patience to achieve great things and to achieve financial freedom and to achieve an early financial freedom, especially if you can keep your living costs under control somewhat. And so that would be my main thing for retail investors right now. Is it's about the most interesting time I've ever seen for retail investors, just because of the onboarding of all of these new people through these disruptive apps.
Yeah, I see a parallel between the meme stock investors today and cryptocurrency back in 2018. I don't know if you're in Bitcoin, but we saw a huge rally coming up at the end, and a lot of people were getting involved. But because they ended up losing so much money, it turned them off it then for the next couple of years. And that's my worry for new investors coming in today on these stocks, that they somehow lose more money than they can afford, and it turns them off investing.
Absolutely.
That's one of my major worries for them.
No, I'm really glad, EMF, that you brought up Bitcoin. I did actually participate in that rally in 2017, and I actually got really lucky. That's why I was saying earlier on in this whole thing, there's this element of luck. And I was able to book a pretty good profit, very small portion of the portfolio, but I used the profit actually, I believe, to invest in one of my real estate deals. So I was able to take something speculative and get it into something more traditional. But you're right. I remember I was on the train going from where I live to San Francisco. And I remember vividly, I don't remember if I was going to a meetup there, because before the pandemic, I used to do all these PPC Ian meetups, and that was so much fun. I can't wait till we get back to that. It was my favorite part of it all, is meeting with dividend investors in person over coffee, just talking about it. And I remember hearing someone on the train talking to a friend or family saying, oh my goodness, I lost all this money on Bitcoin. And he was really depressed about it, sad about it, that he lost all his money. And you're right that getting into anything that's really hyped up is kind of dangerous for newer investors. And it's dangerous these days, even more so, I think, back than then, because you also have public figureheads who have gotten very popular, who are touting some of these securities, like Elon Musk. I have so much respect for him and what he's accomplished. I think he's a really cool guy. But what I would say is sometimes he's on Twitter and he'll say he'll really hype up like Dogecoin. And basically, I think, I don't own any of that one, but I know some of the younger people who follow him very closely. They're like, yeah, I'm going to buy this. And I think even like Mark Cuban is another famous investor here in the US. And I think he was saying something about his son is like all in on, I forget which cryptocurrency, but it might have been Dogecoin again. And then you have people like Cathie Wood from ARK Investing, who operates one of the most successful tech-oriented ETFs, or a family of ETFs that are tech, and she's really like into tech, like space exploration, and those funds have performed really well. And one of her biggest holdings is Tesla, and other stocks that are very richly valued. And I think that newer investors, when you just ask someone, say, who is maybe like 18 years old, like, what do you think investing is about, or who do you follow in investing? They're probably going to say people like Cathie Wood, Elon Musk, like Mark Cuban, those types of public figureheads. And I think that's good because they're bringing a lot of awareness. But I think with awareness also comes responsibility. And I think people also need to realize that, well, Cathie Wood, she was really smart. She got into all of these companies before they took off. That's why she has the best performing fund. Elon Musk, he got into Bitcoin for Tesla. He bought it quite a bit ago when it was much cheaper, and he's done really well on it. And so I think he's just bringing up Dogecoin, honestly, because I think he thinks it's funny. It's just kind of, I think he finds it interesting and kind of a quirky way. But I think investors have to be very careful. And what I would say, I actually do own some Bitcoin now, and I got really lucky because when everything fell out after the collapse, I started buying it again at $3,700, and now it's at like 56,000 today or something. And so the thing that I've always learned as an investor is sometimes you do have to go for the value. You have to go the opposite way. You have to do what's uncomfortable. You have to go after the stocks. I was buying the energy companies when they had when everyone a few months ago was saying energy will never come back. Everything's going electric. Oil has no future. And I knew at that point, well, I don't want a huge exposure to energy, but that's when I need to buy. And so that's where I really do think that some of the younger investors or newer retail investors, they would benefit so much actually by learning from Warren Buffett, because that's the Warren Buffett way. That's what he does, is he likes to go for the value. He likes to go when everyone else is feeling fearful. That's what he'll go for. But if everyone's feeling greedy, he'll stay away from it. And that's one of those classic lessons that I think, a lot of us have to learn the hard way. I've learned it the hard way in the past. And so I just think that's a huge risk factor right now and social media has amplified that risk factor big time.
Super. I think those are really some words of wisdom from both of you. And I can't add anything more to that. I just hope that we don't get such a large crisis indeed, that people really get into trouble. Well, thank you for all these kinds of stories as well, Ian. I think it's a nice moment now to go to some of the listeners' questions. I know that in the European community there was quite some excitement here, and we can't start without the first question from our most loyal listener, and his name is Phil. Just for you, for you. Every podcast will have his question as first. Just, we need to, it's about consistency and respect for tradition here. So maybe I'll start with this question. He asked, when was the moment when you finalized your strategic plan? And how did you come to this moment? And do you have a procedure in place to evaluate, improve your plan over time? So he's referring to your general dividend investing strategy.
It took, honestly, it took years and years, even probably decades to get to it. Again, I think one of the things about myself is I feel like I took so long to evolve as an investor that I hope everyone listening goes through the journey a lot quicker than I did. But I would say for me, I was always had a dividend stock focus. Like when I got started as a younger middle schooler, basically, in that compact stock. It was, I think at the time they paid a dividend. But I was always had that dividend focus. And when I got into college and I was in the investing group there, I remember it was a lot of fun because I would bring in all these stock proposals, and some of them got, it was a real money investment fund, and some of them got selected, but some of them did not. One of my famous ones that got shot down was Altria, because I think being at a university, the club did not want to take on the risk of associating itself with a sin stock. At Stanford University, we just bought a bunch of Altria. Back then, it wasn't even called Altria. That was, I don't know. I think it was, I don't even remember what it was, the predecessor. But and this was around the time too when the stocks were dirt cheap, because they had just gone through that master settlement agreement with the United States government, and the stocks were just really cheap, and they were great values. But certainly I understand why my peers did not vote for that proposal. And honestly, if I were in their chair, I wouldn't vote for it either. I was probably bringing it in more just for a topic of conversation than actually seriously buying it, because you have to certain situations like that with educational institutions. Obviously, it's a sin stock. And so, but what I would say is, over the years, I kept developing this love for dividend stocks and cash flow, but I had never really keyed in, I'm gonna live off of the dividend stocks. I didn't get to that point until a lot further along. I remember I graduated college. I got into my first job. I realized that working a job can be very stressful. Now, thankfully, I'm in the Silicon Valley, and so I've been lucky. I've worked at a lot of companies that have been successful. Like that first company I worked at, I ended up getting stock in the company, and the company ended up getting bought out by a private equity firm, and I made some good money on the stock. And so, but I wasn't making good financial choices back then. What did I do with my earnings? I ended up paying off an expensive sports car that I bought. So I wasn't making good choices. But anyways, what I learned through that experience working at these companies, and I think this is a really wise word for the community, is tech jobs. It's a younger person's game. I've heard, that's not my words. Someone else told me this who was older, who I was sitting down with, a mentor who's very successful in the tech industry, but he moved more from like an operational role to more of like a senior management leadership role, more of like just an advisory type role. He said, Ian, this is a younger person's game. And now I understand, because I still view myself as reasonably young, but not as young as most of the people are around here in the tech roles. And it's true, you need a lot of energy. You have to work really long hours. It's really stressful. I worked at one job where I was up until 3 a.m. every night. This was not my first job. This was when I was further along in my career. I had a really large team working for me. And I remember we had a new boss got hired, and he basically wanted us to prove to him, why should we have a job at the company? Why are we there? Show me why you should be there. And so I took it upon myself to work with my team, and we basically created a 200-slide PowerPoint presentation to prove to him literally, why do I and all the people that work for me, why should we even be there? Because we don't want to lose our jobs. And so we were fearful of that. And thankfully, after the presentation, we all kept our jobs because we worked so hard convincing him why we were adding value to the company. But that's the culture around here, is what kind of value are you adding? Why should you be here? I can fire you. You could be gone tomorrow. In fact, I worked at one company where I did get laid off. And being someone who's been a high achiever my entire life, being someone who went to Stanford University, I was valedictorian of my high school, getting laid off, it was almost, I never thought that would be part of my life's journey. I never thought that that could happen to me. You always hear like, oh, someone got laid off, but I'm like, oh, that'll never happen to me, never. And it was also around a time where the great financial crisis was hitting, and so companies were doing a lot of layoffs. But that being said, it was such a traumatic and just difficult experience for me, because someone who's always been a high achiever, and then all of a sudden, oh my goodness, how did this even happen? It was never in the plans, and it was kind of that led to it. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is here's the thing. All of my videos on YouTube are an hour for a reason. I'm really verbose in all of my answers. So I hopefully the answers aren't too long here, but it all builds. And so it's after these experiences of, I graduate college, I enter the workforce, I'm like, wow, this work stuff, it's not that good. It's not that fun. I mean, it's fun enough if I did it for 20 hours a week, but not for 70 hours a week. And then I get, I get laid off. And then I'm making all this money, and it's great. I'm making all this money, and I'm making money not only on my salary, but I'm getting raises, I'm getting stock options. And at one company, which I'm really proud of, I made it all the way to the vice president level at a publicly traded company. I'm like, wow, I did it. I'm one of the youngest vice presidents at this company. I think I was the youngest vice president at the company. It was really an accomplishment. But at the same time, to have that level of responsibility and to manage so many people, it is so much work. It's like, wow, this is a younger person's game. I can't keep up at this pace. And so along all of this time, also what's interesting is I kept gaining weight. Like each year I was gaining more and more weight. And at one point I was about 40 pounds heavier than I am now. And so also along this time, I'll tell you, there's someone in the dividend investing community, Jason Fieber. A lot of him know him as Dividend Mantra. That's when I was reading his blog. Later, he became Mr. Free at 33. But I started reading his blog, and I'm like, wait a minute. This is before people were even doing YouTube. they weren't really doing dividends on YouTube. I kind of was one of the earlier people doing dividends on YouTube, but before then it was mostly blogs. And so I was reading the blogs. Back in that day, actually, there were some other blogs. Like there's one called like Accumulating Assets, and there's one like called like Compounding Income. There were all these different blogs, and it was really small people. It was like not Jason's big superstar, but a lot of these blogs, it was smaller blogs. It was like not a lot of readers. But what I would do, I remember, is every day I was commuting really far. And this is another reason I gained all this weight, is I was literally sitting in the car. In addition to working 70 hours a week, I was commuting like 2 hours a day. And I remember when I was driving home, I would stop sometimes just to grab dinner to avoid the traffic, and then come home after, when the traffic was lighter. And I would just sit there eating dinner, and I would read these blogs. And it was kind of an epiphany at that point that, wait, I've been investing in dividend stocks all my life. I love dividend stocks. I have basically graduated school. I've become an executive, a successful person in corporate Silicon Valley, but this isn't sustainable forever. I can't do this forever. It's okay right now. And there's pros and cons. There's a lot about working these jobs that I loved. I love, especially when I became VP, I love the fact that I was managing people and I was having an impact in their lives. And I had a lot of people working for me who I could help, and I could train them, and they went on to do great things. And it was this sense of accomplishment. But I also realized this can't go on forever. And when I started reading some of these blogs, honestly, it was like a kind of epiphany moment that everything I've been working on my entire life, now is the time to double down on it and really write out the game plan, really make it something serious, make it something real that is, I've always been someone who has been more into the more expensive things. I bought fancy cars and like to buy fancy things, but I started realizing, wait, other people out there, they're doing it differently. They're cutting their expenses. They're saving money. They're living abroad. They're doing geo arbitrage. There's all these creative things. And so what I would say is I owe a lot of credit just to the community out there on the internet, especially people doing the blogs before people were even doing YouTube, who gave me this kind of push. They pushed me in the right direction, that everything I've been working on my whole life, now is the time to to really formalize it and take it to the next level. And that's where it all started. And I just started reading. I remember I'd get up every morning and look, oh my gosh, did they have a new blog post? And I had like 5 or 10 different blogs, and I'd go to all of them, and I'd always look like, is there a new post? I can't wait to see. I can't wait to see what they bought next. And it was that whole cycle. But yeah, long answer to your question, but it wasn't really one moment or another, but it's kind of building I think my boss right now, who I have now, he told me something that I really agree with. He said, Ian, different people have different ways of learning. And he said, the way you learn, that I've noticed, is you have to experience something for yourself. And he is so right, that for me, if you tell me like, Ian, oh, when you go and work, it's going to be hard, and you're going to wish you had passive income because you'll realize it's not sustainable forever. I can't really understand that until I live through it. So one of the reasons maybe for me it took so long to kind of get to where I am now is I had to go through these experiences to really appreciate and understand the whole ecosystem of life.
We have another question from Dividend Wave this time, and
I think you know Dividend Wave, right?
Dividend Wave is awesome. I always look forward to his analyses on Twitter. I love it. He's just fabulous insights.
The king of the one sliders, we call him.
That's right.
We love him. So he asks if he remembers you come from a tech background, but don't own those type of stocks. Is there a reason why?
Well, yes. So yeah, there's a few. I love this question. So I think one thing that as my classic style goes, this will be another long answer. But basically, first and foremost, some of it is rebellion. I think as dividend investors, we're all trying to rebel in some way or another against, maybe not, I can't speak for the whole community, but I can speak for myself and certainly some other folks that I've met at my meetups over the years. It's this idea of hacking the system and finding a path, a special path, like doing something. It's almost like like a cheat code in a video game. And it's kind of, for me, because I had been in tech all these years, and because I basically had been worn out a bit by the amount of hours that I worked, it was almost rebelling a bit that it's like, look, I'm not going to buy tech stocks just because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so burnt out from being in tech. That's part of it. Now, I'll tell you the other part of it, though, is, and to be fair, I do own a few tech stocks. I own Apple. That one performed really well. I own IBM. That one is not on my good list right now. But they do have a strong patent portfolio, and I think they could be very successful in some of their up and coming technologies like quantum computing and also blockchain. So I haven't ruled them out yet. And then I have other stocks like Honeywell, for example, that people don't consider it a tech stock, but I look at those types of companies as tech innovative companies as well. Certainly even my favorite stock, Johnson & Johnson, in many ways, yeah, it's a healthcare company, but it's a tech stock as well. And in some ways, it's just tech that's applied to medicine. And so, but that being said, it's true. I don't have a huge allocation in stocks like the traditional tech stocks that a lot of dividend investors own, like Microsoft or Broadcom. There's different types of Intel, those types of stocks. And I would say part of it is that rebellion. I'm coming back around now, though. I think this year I have been adding to Apple. I've been adding to Honeywell and trying to make up for it a little bit because I've kind of realized that is an area in my portfolio of weakness. That is an area where I could stand to improve. But I think one of the things also that so many investors they don't see on my channel is the broader picture that I do own investments outside of my dividend portfolio. And so I do have exposure to tech from employee stock options that my wife and I have earned over the years working at tech companies that we still own. And so because of those, well, the options now have been exercised, and so we own the shares. But these companies, that's not reflected in what I share on YouTube. And so I feel like sometimes when you're a dividend investor, it's not just about the dividend portfolio, but it's about your broader financial picture. And because we have exposure to tech, and I've done a few angel investments, most of them have been losers, but one or two of them have been pretty good. I've got that exposure. Also, I do have exposure to finance and to tech through cryptocurrencies. And so, as I mentioned, I started buying Bitcoin again in 2018 at 3,700, and I averaged up for a while in that. And I've been buying some cryptos more recently as well. One of the ones I like a lot is called Algorand. It actually pays a staking dividend. But that's a smaller part of the portfolio, but also it still is something, holistically speaking, I factor into what I'm doing. And I look at crypto as part of my exposure to tech. Same can go for real estate. People ask me sometimes, Ian, why don't you have more REITs in your portfolio? Why don't you add more money to Realty Income, which is a REIT that I own? Why don't you do that? Well, one of the reasons is I do own real estate outside of the dividend portfolio. I'm a homeowner, but also I own commercial real estate because I'm a commercial real estate developer by trade. And so the fact of the matter is, for my financial picture, I have to look at things holistically. And it's because I have the real estate outside of the dividend portfolio. I don't want more of it in, or I would be over allocated to real estate. And so tech, I would say I'm certainly not over allocated. I'm probably still under allocated. But I have more allocation, I think, than a lot of people realize because of the allocation that I have outside of the dividend portfolio. But that is an area where I'm always looking to add. And I would say out of all the tech I own right now, I like Apple the most. It's certainly not at a bargain basement. It's trading at a forward PE of like 27 or so. But I'm saying in terms of company, I like that company. And I think it's a great diversified play where I have exposure to software, I have exposure to the brand, I have exposure to even the microprocessors. So they offer exposure. One of my friends on my Facebook group pointed out, because I was considering buying a microprocessor company, a chip company. They were saying, Ian, you might not even need that because you have exposure to microprocessors through your Apple position. And so that's been one I've been attempting to build, and I'd like to see that position build quite a bit over the coming years. But then again, I also have to be real that it just doesn't pay a lot of cash flow. And honestly, even if they increase the dividend, it's never going to pay enough cash flow really to help me. It'll be future generations. And so for me to achieve my goals, I have to keep that in mind as well, that I'm not going to have enough cash flow from a stock like Apple to pay bills.
But, I honestly think that Apple will come down again because the multiples don't justify the current earnings power of Apple, in my opinion. It went too crazy. I bought Apple at $135 pre-split when it was like 13 PE, when everyone said Apple is dead.
Yeah.
But now it is on the other side, I think. So I think it will come down to the mean here, or the earnings grow into it, but then we can buy them at that time. Yes, so
I hope
we're not in
so.
a rush.
I hope you're right.
Yeah. Okay. So then maybe a next question is from Tomosh152, and he asked, how much cash do you keep on hand? He said, EMF and I had we needed to be laugh a little bit, because he says, I'm at 1.1%, but it feels like but I feel this is non-working cash in his broker's accounts early. So we were laughing because of now you said the not even 1%, but 1.1%. But how do you look at cash as such?
So it's something that fluctuates for me over time, and it's something that's evolved over time. When I was younger, I did not keep a lot of cash. Like before I was married, before we had kids, it was a different financial picture because I could take on more risk, having less responsibility at that time, and wasn't as concerned about having too much cash. These days, being that I'm married, being that we have 2 kids, that we're homeowners, that we are largely dependent on my income to pay bills, it's a different situation where having cash helps us all sleep at night. And so I would say lately I've been probably over investing a little bit, because I have been seeing some bargains out there, not necessarily in tech stocks, but in consumer packaged goods stocks. Like Campbell's Soup, for example, has been one that I really like. General Mills is another. Those were trading at good bargains. There's been some others like Kimberly-Clark, one of my favorite companies. There's been some good bargains out there. And so I've gotten a little bit more aggressive lately on buying those stocks, but now I realize, I spent a little bit too much. I need to slow down, and I need to rebuild the cash and be disciplined in that manner. But I would say, honestly, I don't really have a percentage to share, other than we have emergency funds that are kind of locked away in bank accounts in case of an emergency, and that is untouchable. And then usually for me to feel comfortable, I like to have, I'd say, a good, like, say, 6 months worth of living expenses on hand, just in case, because anything can happen. We just don't know. It's a weird world. But then in like kind of day to day, like just kind of like checking account that I would use for buying stocks, that cash right now is basically next to nothing. Because I've invested it all. And so we're at the point now where, yeah, it would feel a little bit better so I can relate with this question. And I think, honestly, it's a challenge that a lot of dividend investors face. Because I'll tell you, one of my earliest videos I did on my YouTube channel was basically, I have no emergency fund. I shared at the time, like way back when I started on YouTube, hey guys, I have no emergency fund. I'm all in. Because, and honestly, when you're kind of newer in your journey, or when you're just trying to get from point A to point B, you want your money working for you. You want to have it in the stocks. And I do think maybe dividend investors don't take as much risk with the types of stocks they buy. They don't go and they don't buy AMC. They don't buy GameStop. But some of them do. But I mean, most dividend investors, they're buying more the classic Johnson & Johnson's, Kimberly-Clark's. But I think where I see myself, and I also see a lot of other dividend investors, they do take risk, is on the cash management, myself included. And so I historically have not been a good person to ask about cash management, because I just go all in on dividend stocks. But I would say, thankfully, mainly because of my wife's influence and the way that she has been raised and kind of manages money, has been a positive influence in my life, because she has been the one that's really made sure that we have some kind of cash reserves above and beyond what I would historically do, because that's been an area of weakness for me, just that it's been so tempting to get my money working for me.
It feels, I think, for many dividend investors like we're continuously in the candy store.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you're passionate about it, then we always find some dividend stocks that we would love to own more of. It's like
That's right.
even at these market levels, we'll always find some.
That's right. Well, and that's when so many people ask me, Ian, why do you select individual stocks instead of buying an ETF or an index fund? The very reason is I always can find some stocks that are on sale, and not every stock I buy is on sale, but I certainly feel like Campbell's Soup, Kimberly-Clark, there are a few stocks on sale right now, and I get excited buying them. Also, there's a spinoff from Pfizer that I own called Viatris. Again, in terms of full disclosure, I own basically every stock I've mentioned today, other than the ones I say I do not own, I own. But I see values out there in those types of stocks. And so you're right, it's like being in the candy store. And I think part of it as well is the dividend investor. I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for myself. Like, why do we do what we do? A lot of dividend investors, and I'm sure so many people are different, but I've met enough dividend investors that I know there's enough that are like this, and I'm like this in many ways, that you're looking to kind of break free of something. And again, when you break free of it, is your life really going to change? Maybe it won't. You might not change anything. But some of us, maybe it's just psychological. But I feel when you're trying to kind of break free of something, you're trying to kind of own back your own life. You're trying to command your life, get more control over your life by having that cash flow. It's almost this thing where if you're not in the trenches, you're not buying the stock, you kind of feel like you're losing out. It becomes psychological. And so I think a lot of dividend investors get caught up in this cycle that, yeah, I'm probably going to have a difficult day at work today, but at least I got to buy my dividend stock. And so I feel like that makes it compelling that you get to keep buying more.
Yeah. And by the way, just maybe a company which might be interesting for you if you like consumer staples, it's Ahold Delhaize. It's really popular in the European community. It has 65% exposure to the US because it owns Food Lion, as an example.
Okay.
Grocery chain, and they're the market dominant leader in the Netherlands. They're also based in the Netherlands, and they have also an ADR, and they have around 4% yield at the moment, I think, in a country that charges 15% dividend tax. So it's Ahold Delhaize. You might be surprised about its geographic footprint because, like I mentioned, 60% is from the US, and they have also the Dutch Amazon as well. So they also have a large tech, which allows them also to use that knowledge to apply it into their chain. I think they also own Peapod. Is that a brand name in the US? But I think it's mainly on the West Coast where they have a large footprint.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really interesting. Speaking of that whole like kind of food delivery segment, one question I'd have for you two, just because I don't have the European insight as much, is how would something like this company compare to like Tesco? Like in the UK, I know like Tesco is really popular, a grocery chain. Are they doing anything innovative? I believe they pay a dividend. Are they doing anything like really innovative on food delivery or tech? Is that
Ahold or Tesco?
Tesco.
Okay. I've not checked up Tesco lately anymore because I know they were having quite some troubles a few years ago. And that's why it dropped off my radar, because it doesn't typically pop up on our screeners anymore. I wouldn't be able to answer Tesco. But maybe you, EMF?
No, I'm similar to you, Tesco. I'm familiar with them. They're quite popular here in Ireland, but in terms of innovation, I don't know. I haven't looked at them a whole lot recently.
Got it. Okay, cool.
I'm sure one of the listeners will come up with some answers for us. So we count on that. Just tag our Twitter profiles, and that would be good input. Okay, we have touched this already a little bit, but Forward Dividends is asking if you had to choose only one of the two, would it be Danone or Nestle?
That's a good question. I haven't looked at Nestle very closely lately. And so I would have to do a stock analysis. I've been overdue to look at it. Just right now for me, it's hard to answer this one. I mean, I would say Danone just because I'm a little bit more familiar with the company, and I feel that with the problem or the difficulty answering this question is I'm also answering it through the context of my portfolio. And so my portfolio is very heavily weighted already in the food sector. And so I have exposure to some kind of snack foods, ice cream, for example, through Unilever. I have exposure to a lot of snack foods through PepsiCo. I have a lot of exposure to carbonated beverages with Coca-Cola. General Mills, I have exposure to cereals and snack foods. Utz Brands Inc., which I really like, I have exposure to potato chips. The list goes on. Even Hormel Foods, I've got exposure to meats. And so the challenge for me is Nestle is more of just a broader based food company. And so it potentially would be, for my personal situation, a little bit more duplicative of what I already have. Whereas Danone, it does give me more of a niche exposure to the more healthier yogurts, for example, and dairy products, which I don't have as much exposure to through my other holdings. And so for me, for my personal portfolio, I like Danone just because of it fills a particular niche. That being said, if I were looking at things differently, and I didn't own all of these other companies, it may be a different selection. And I think that's a really important thing for everyone listening, is sometimes when you're selecting stocks, it's not only which stock is the best stock or which stock is the one the community likes the most or which ones are being covered on the YouTube channels. It's also about like what makes sense for your personal situation, because everyone's portfolio is different. And when you're trying to select stocks that complement the other stocks in your portfolio, it could give a completely different answer than someone else.
Yeah, and I can only add to that Nestle has the longest track record in Europe when it comes to dividend growth. I think it's now 70 years or something like that. But personally, I'm also much more of a fan of Danone because what you mentioned about health conscious, for me, it's a play on the millennial veganism and flexitarianism lifestyle, because of with their Alpro brands that are all around soy milk, nuts milks, and they're quite doing really well in that. And the stock is mainly down now due to the water business and the restaurants closed. Whereas with Nestle, I think you get probably a more stable business. It could be more the anchor of a portfolio. But if you're already anchored, then like in my case, then I rather also go for Danone in this case, because you can pick up on a catalyst, on a trend, which is, I think, going to stay and going to grow over time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah,
okay, so we have a good question here from Value Down Under. We spoke about value investing earlier on and how we look for maybe companies that are cheap or perceived to be cheap at the time. But how do you go about avoiding pitfalls to ensure that the dividends continue to grow at or above earnings growth rates?
Well, that's a great question. I would say it's important to diversify because it's impossible to avoid a dividend cut. Just because, like, for example, some of the companies I own, like Cedar Fair and some of the energy companies, had to cut or suspend their dividend due to the pandemic. But none of us could have ever foreseen that, hey, a global pandemic is going to come. We didn't know that. And so because we don't know the future, and it seems like the world we live in is ever changing, even more so than ever before. There's so much disruption and happening in just business, and there's so much just globally happening with our world that rule number one for me is I like to diversify. I would say rule number two is I like to look at the track record of dividend increases. So kind of like Nestle, for example, owning companies that have a stable track record of increasing the dividends over the long term is always a plus. Whenever I'm reading shareholder materials like investor presentations or annual reports, any company that places an emphasis on the dividend, I automatically like, because not every company is like this, but a lot of companies, they have a board of directors who is very focused on shareholder dividends. And they even go as far sometimes to say that, hey, our company, one of our values is paying this dividend. And so those types of companies I really like. Obviously, I would always go for companies, not always, but I try to skew towards companies that have lower payout ratio so that there's room to increase the dividend. There's room to pay the dividend. Even if times get hard, even if the business faces some hiccups, they can continue to pay the dividend because they're not paying out as much as they could. There's a good buffer. There's a payout ratio that leaves room to increase the dividend. I would say companies that have lower levels of debt are preferable to me, because in terms of paying the dividend or servicing debt is always going to come first. They don't want to default on their debt. So if they run into a difficult time of cash management and what are we going to do with the limited cash we have, always better to have less debt, because it's just one more expense that the company does not have to pay. Now, thankfully, what I would say is in recent times, interest rates are so low that companies are almost incentivized to take out debt, and debt is, it's not so much of a burden as it once was. Personally speaking, I believe that lower interest rates are going to be here for a while, just because of the sheer kind of conundrum that we're in, that the government, worldwide governments, but in the United States in particular, has printed so much money and created so much financial stimulus that and we're still kind of trying to recover from the pandemic. I'm not so certain interest rates are going to go up in the immediate term. And so I think that's good for companies that have a lot of debt. But I also think still we never know what will happen in the long run. And I also think it's just a sign of a well-managed company, regardless of what the interest rate is, that they keep a handle, they keep a good they keep good practices as it pertains to their debt. So I would also say that there are companies, I always look for a company that has some kind of secret sauce or competitive moat, because those companies that pay out growing streams of dividends over the long run, those companies are targets. One of the things I read, one of my favorite investors, you were asking earlier, Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger, and I chose Charlie Munger. I'd actually add Peter Lynch. He's the one I would really choose. I really respect Peter Lynch. And one of the things he said in his book, One Up on Wall Street, which I recently reread this year, is that basically he likes the sin stock industry, because in the US at least, you're not even going to have any more competitors, because who's going to get into an industry that's shrinking in size each year? And who's going to get into an industry that is so heavily regulated by the government? Who's going to get into an industry that you can't even market the products you have? There's all these rules now around marketing. And so the only people that are there are the ones that are already there. And so he likes that industry. And I would say for me, like a competitive moat, it could be that. That's one of the reasons I like the sin stocks. But there's other industries like carbonated beverages, for example. Coca-Cola has a competitive moat because of their brand. Technology, Apple has a competitive moat because of their brand. So a competitive moat can come a lot of ways. It can come from your brand. It can come from just circumstances that it's almost impossible to have a competitor. I like regulated electric utilities, because in the US, if you have a regulated electric utility, there's no competitor coming in. It's regulated. The government says this is the only company that's providing electricity here. So I like those kind of monopoly type situations, government regulated monopoly. And so for me, if I'm looking for a business that can pay cash flow over the long run, I certainly want something that has a secret sauce or a secret moat. Sometimes that moat can come through diversification. Johnson & Johnson, for example, is such a big company with such a big market cap. And they're one of the companies, my favorite company actually, that grows through acquisition. They make a lot of acquisitions. And I would say their competitive secret sauce is that they basically are broadly diversified through medical devices, pharmaceuticals, and also consumer-facing products. And they're very big, so they can win out any bidding war. They can win out all of these acquisitions. People want to get acquired by them. And so the fact of the matter is I'm sure they have competitive moats and they have patents on their pharmaceuticals, but those patents only last 20 years. And so the fact of the matter is, for them, I look at the competitive moat as their scale and their ability to to be diversified and their ability to make wise acquisitions. And so again, I think it differs by each industry and it differs for each particular stock, but there's got to be that secret sauce or that competitive moat to warrant an investment from my side. And I would say sometimes, honestly, that secret sauce comes just through first mover advantage as well. Is it the company that started the first? And you see sometimes if someone is the first mover, even if their product isn't the best product, they just have that first mover advantage. They have the distribution locked up. They have the brand recognition. They have the costs under control. They have less debt than someone starting now. And so I'll give an example is in the real estate industry, for example, where I work. When we look at like acquiring a new real estate project or building a new real estate project, what we like to do is we like to look at, well, what's it going to cost us to either acquire this or build it? And how is that cost basis going to compare to our competitor who is around the corner, who got in a few years ago? And sometimes when you look at that, it's like, yeah, we're going to build something that's going to be a similar product to what they have, but it's going to cost us twice as much because prices have gone up, cost of construction has gone up, land value has gone up. And when you look at that, it's like, well, yeah, we're going to have the same product, but we're paying twice as much as them. And so it's going to put us in a disadvantageous situation where we can't compete as much. And so there's a lot to be said for that first mover advantage, whether it's in real estate or actually in any other industry as well.
Very good answer. So we have a question which is quite interesting to me actually right now from Daniel, and he asks us, how do you teach your kids about stocks and how to deal with money in general? You talk about generational wealth. How would you enforce that when you're gone?
I really love that question. So this is something I think about a lot. Now, my kids are younger. My daughter is 3, my son's almost 6. And so they're younger, so they're not necessarily at the age yet where stocks are super exciting to them. Now, I'm sure there are some 6-year-olds out there where it's really exciting, but they're getting there. What I like to do for one is I like to buy them stock. For whether it's for a holiday like Christmas or whether it's for a birthday, I like to give the gift of stock. And so that's something that I've been focused on. And now my kids both own Disney stock. Unfortunately, the dividend got suspended there, but my understanding is they're now going to probably bring it back. So that was really nice to see. And that's why I don't sell stocks, by the way, because yeah, even with a dividend cut or suspension, you don't know, it could come back. And so Disney, I think they had to suspend it during the pandemic, and they wanted to focus their efforts on streaming. They're streaming Disney Plus service. And honestly, that's paid off. The stock is through the roof. It's done really well. But they also own Hershey Company, which is a chocolate and snack food company here, I think mainly focused on the US. Anyway, the first thing is just getting them the stock and trying to communicate to them, like on birthdays and holidays, that like, hey, yeah, you're going to get some gifts as well, but one of your gifts is this stock, so that they start understanding that there's value behind that. That's important. And what I also do from time to time is I write them letters. Now, there's, again, too young, honestly, to fully understand the letters, but what I do is I just type them up, print them out, and I put them in the file, the same file that has all their stock records. So when they're older, and I at some point pass these stocks on to them and pass the day-to-day management of their portfolios over to them, they have access to those letters that I wrote, so that they start understanding more about, like, well, why did you do this? And obviously, I think the YouTube videos, I hope one day when they're older, that maybe they reflect back, and hopefully YouTube and all this stuff is still out there on the internet. Who knows what the future holds, but at that time, maybe they can reflect back and look at some of that stuff. But I would say when the kids are a little bit older, definitely one of the things that I would like to do for like allowance money is maybe, hey, when you get an allowance for doing chores around the house or helping the family with certain things, some of that you can save for toys for yourself, or what, buy yourself an ice cream or whatever you want to do. But some of it should be saved for either savings or investing. And so I think there's kind of that practice and helping ingrain in them the importance of money management, because I'll tell you, one of the things that I could have benefited from in my earlier, I start looking back at just what are all the mistakes I made and what are some of the things I wish I knew when I was younger. I didn't know very well about money management. When I was younger, in my real early days in high school, I took my life savings and I put it in buying these really fancy rims for my car. Like at the time, I think they were 17-inch rims, and back now, like the bigger wheels on car. But anyways, I spent it on things like that. But I didn't think, oh, maybe I should have put more of it in compact computer. I was really shortchanging the investing. I was putting it in other stuff, and so for my kids, I'd like to ingrain more that the sooner you get started, the sooner you develop those habits, they'll really help you throughout your entire life. And the sooner you can get started with those habits, it's going to help you on kind of keeping the lifestyle under control. It's going to help you on achieving a better work-life balance, and you'll be able to enjoy the dividends even younger than me. And so there's a lot of work still to be done. But those are some of the things I've thought about so far and that I put into action so far.
Super. I think this is really nice, and you inspired me to think a little bit about my kids in that regards as well. And I really love the idea of writing a letter. And it's hard to get my son into it because he is 9 still, but he's starting to get some interest because he's interested in how many followers I have on Twitter and that many people like investing. So maybe that's something where I can hook into it. But maybe let's go to the last question of today. And I think it's a nice question to round up as well, because Richard asks, what do you think about the sweet spot between the current yield, the dividend yield, and the compounded annual growth rate of the dividend? Where is your sweet spot somehow?
This is such a good question. I have always found, and it depends on the market you're in, if you're in a more expensive market or a cheaper market. Right now, I would say we're in a more expensive market where stocks have gone, in general, just S&P 500 or like a global index of equities, prices are pretty high. So in a more expensive, and when prices are high, average yields are lower. And so I would say in a market like this, my sweet spot for dividend stocks is a starting yield somewhere between 2.8% and 3%. Somewhere around there, with a compound annual growth rate somewhere around 7%, that I feel is sustainable. Because you can find these companies like Starbucks, which is one of my favorite dividend stocks that I bought a lot of last year, and the compound annual growth rate is a lot higher. It's like way up there, but it's not going to be sustainable. Sometimes it's going to come back down. But I would say stocks that can pay a starting yield around 2.8 to 3% right now and can give me a 7% compound annual growth rate over the long run, that's my sweet spot. And it's a sweet spot for me because it's kind of satisfies a bunch of different requirements. It gives me, typically those types of stocks have a more stable dividend. They're not overpaying. Their payout ratio isn't too high. Typically, those types of stocks are the more premium stocks that have a brand or a competitive mode. Typically, those are just those bread and butter kind of consumer packaged goods stocks that I'm so familiar with that I have a lot of faith in. Now, I'll tell you, if the market were discounted, if it were a cheaper market, if we went back to last April, when in 2020, when things were on sale and there are some really good values out there, in that kind of market, I would be looking for stocks with a starting yield maybe of 3.5%. Because everything back then was on sale. And so 3.5%, maybe 3.6%. Again, I'd be looking for that 7% compound annual growth rate. I like stocks, obviously, that have a higher compound annual growth rate on the dividend, maybe up to 9 or 10%. But I know that level is not always sustainable. I think 7%, it's more sustainable over decades of time. And so it largely fluctuates on the market that we're in. But that's how I look at it. And if you look at my personal portfolio, typically when I do my portfolio updates on YouTube, it's always that my current dividend yield is somewhere gonna be around anywhere from 3.3% to 3.5%. It's always kind of in that range. That's usually where it falls. And some stocks I have pay a higher starting yield. Some stocks pay a much lower starting yield. And one of the things I was just discussing recently, with some of my subscribers is that I like to buy sometimes opposites. Like I'll buy one stock that's a really, really deep discount stock, like Viatris. I think it's like a bargain at these levels, but also the company's got some problems. When you buy a bargain, there's usually deep discount value. There's going to be some problems. But because I bought that, I felt okay buying Honeywell this week, which is trading at a PE of 27. It has a starting yield in the 1%, well, just over 1%. Their dividend is growing quickly, but am I going to pay a lot of bills on Honeywell stock? Not anytime soon. It's got to grow the dividend quite a bit. But I kind of look at it as merging the opposites. I look at it as blended yield. I look at it as portfolio wide. And so I do have those stocks like Apple that have the really slow yield, but I have high yielding stocks as well, like PPL Corporation, which help balance it out. And I look at it blended. But again, kind of, if you told me, Ian, you could just buy one stock today or two or three stocks, the stocks I'd be buying would be stocks like Johnson & Johnson, Pepsi, McDonald's, Clorox, Kimberly-Clark, those types of stocks that have those yields in the high 2% range right now in this particular market.
Yeah, we love that blended. We've spoke about that before, that kind of blended approach where you buy Microsoft, which is 1%, and then maybe someone like, AT&T off the top of my head for 7 or 8%. So it's kind of an approach we've spoke about quite a bit on this show, and something that we both quite like. So it's nice to hear you say that.
Right on.
I think that was a nice way to end the show. There's lots and lots of information there. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this with us. It's been a pleasure to have you. I know I enjoyed it, and I'm sure European DGI did as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. I think you have quite a lot of supporters in Europe. I'm sure of that. I saw it on the responses and the direct messages. And you know how it is with Europeans, right? Whenever you are in trouble or you need some support, or with YouTube, I would say we've got your back. Yeah, you educated a lot of us. So I think that's a general appreciation that we want to bring forward as well from the European dividend community. And I think to many of us, you're an inspiration. And it also brings us closer to the stocks we own, because we own a lot of US stocks because of just the attractiveness in the dividend policies. So just thank you very much. And also thank you for taking the time to, via EMF and myself, to speak to the European community. It's really much appreciated.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to say, European DGI and EMF, I really appreciate the opportunity. I really love Europeans in Europe. It's the countries in Europe are so beautiful. I can't wait to visit again at some point in the future when just global travel and everything gets a little bit more normal, and maybe even do a meetup there one day. That would be a lot of fun. But I am really fortunate to have so many friends all around the world because of YouTube and the dividend community. And that really is my favorite part about it. And that's kind of my closing thought, is that sometimes like we all get really focused on that goal, like achieving the financial independence. But I think also, honestly, all of us are, maybe you're not 100% to your goal yet, but all of us who are in dividends have some level of cash flow coming in. And so it covers some expenses. So it's not either all or nothing. You could be halfway to financial freedom. And that alone is a really amazing accomplishment that, should be celebrated as so much. But what I'm saying is, a lot of people, they're kind of just so focused on the goal. But what I also have come to realize through this journey is the friendships and the community and everyone who is connected around the world doing this dividend investing, that in many ways is more exciting and it is more rewarding. And especially in times of pandemic where we've all been a little bit isolated, we've been at home more, we've been not as much social contact, and having that community, I would say, is in many ways more exciting than the investing itself. And so thank you for having me on the show today. And I thank you to the entire European community for all of the support. And it just really means the world to me. I'm really blessed to have made so many friendships. And like I said, I chose this podcast is really the first time I've ever done something like this, other than my videos that I do on my own channel. I think this is the first time I've ever done something like this. And it's really on purpose because of how much I value the global nature of our community and everyone all around the world. So thank you so much, guys. I really do appreciate it. And before I do go, as I always say on my YouTube channel, I just want to be careful to mention that what I've mentioned today, it's not financial advice. It's just my personal journey. I'm just sharing my journey for fun and entertainment. And certainly I'm not a financial advisor. And folks out there who want to get into investing or thinking or already in investing, it's important to find your own advisor if that makes sense for you out there. It's just sharing my journey today for fun with all of you. And I thank you for tuning in for this really long episode today.
It's been an honor to have you, and again, thank you so much. And to our community and listeners, if you stuck around this long, we really appreciate it. Thanks very much for all the questions and comments and emails we get. We do really appreciate it. So we'll see you all next week.